advancement there. And again, with solar, I know we got wind in Iowa. Some days we have sun too. Not enough days here recently. Iowa farmers would like to see a lot more sun because very little corn has been planted so far this year. But hopefully today is certainly a better day than we've had for a while. So, yeah, I think we need to look at all of these alternatives. I don't think there's any silver bullet or single answer, but I think that there's a lot of different opportunities to use our natural resources, the technology, and to be able to do it in a sustainable way. Yes, sir.
Yeah. David Osterberg, we actually worked on that bill together in 1980.
That's right.
And I do give you credit.
Well, thank you very much. Well, and as you know, it takes both houses of the legislature and the governor to so we didn't do it by ourselves. But
that's true. But there's a bill right now passed Senate 49-1 in Ways and Means out of the first subcommittee, and I hear it's in trouble, to a tax credit for solar and small wind.
Mm-hmm.
Does that seem like something that you support? $10 million.
Is that what it is? Okay.
It's not a big amount, but
yeah.
Something.
Well, certainly, you know, I'm willing to look at all kinds of things that will provide incentives and encouragement on those things. Obviously, we've got a very delicate, unique situation this year because we've got two houses controlled by different parties, very different philosophies, and so there's been a substantial clash of ideas there. What can come together, and you know from having served there, a lot of the biggest decisions get left to the end, and I think we're probably a couple weeks away from the end of this session, although the per diem expenses are cut off today. And, you know, that system, I was in the legislature before we had that. The sessions used to drag to the end of June, but we've always been able to adjourn within a couple of weeks when per diem expenses get cut off, so the legislators have to pay for their own costs for staying in Des Moines and get no reimbursement for it, and that, I guess that's an inducement to wrap things up and get things resolved. So I'm hopeful on any of those things. That particular bill, I guess I'm not totally familiar with, but I will. Todd Schultz is my legislative, liaison. It works with both houses, and he's got a great relationship with both parties in both houses. And I'll ask him to brief me on that, and then we'll take a close look at that. And I can talk with Tom Sands as the chairman of the Ways and Means Committee in the House. I did meet with him this morning on some other issues, but and he's from, you know, down here, you know, south of Muscatine, so he's the chairman. Would be real key to that bill because he's the chairman of the House Ways and Means Committee. Yeah.
I'm asking about alternative forms of transportation,
right.
Particularly things such as like the train line, which I believe didn't go through or got canceled or something like that.
Well, it hasn't been decided by the legislature. I mean, the previous legislature had approved, you're talking about the passenger rail service. First of all, just to give you a little background on the whole, I was lieutenant governor when the Rock Island line went under, and there was an effort to save that line. In fact, I cast the deciding vote. As lieutenant governor in the old days, used to be the president of the Senate, you only had the power to vote to break a tie on an amendment or on a motion, not on final passage of a bill. We had legislation that would provide a loan from the DOT to the Iowa Interstate to purchase that line. And I now live in Boone County, and a good friend of mine was Senator Jack Nystrom from Boone. Well, he wanted that line to go away because at that time it was Chicago Northwestern. It's now the Union Pacific line goes through, and they didn't want to have the competition from the Iowa Interstate. But I cast the deciding vote twice against my friend Jack Nystrom and helped save that line. We did make that loan to the Iowa Interstate. It's been paid back. The Interstate, Iowa Interstate does provide freight service through, you know, including going through here in Iowa City, goes all the way across the state of Iowa Now, as I understand it, this passenger service is something that is proposed, and of course there's some federal dollars, but it also requires a state match. My concern is I don't want the state to get in the business of subsidizing the ongoing cost. I've said that I'm open to looking at the state providing the match, but not doing an ongoing subsidy. I think that's the biggest concern I've got, because, and I'll give you an example. You know, you can have one of the situations that the state approved not too long ago was the resort down in southeast Iowa, the Honey Creek Resort. Now there's about 20 or is it 30-some million dollars in bonds that are going to be paid back, and right now the DNR is very concerned because it's taking a lot of money that they want for ongoing maintenance of the parks and for other REAP projects, because they've got to pay those bonds, and this project is not generating the revenue. And so that's the danger of the state getting into some project that we've got to subsidize, and it takes away from other needed things. So that's where I've come from. The communities, I understand here in Iowa City, Quad Cities, and Illinois, communities have been very supportive of this. The situation in the legislature is, I think the Senate is supportive, the House is opposed. And this has not been resolved, and whether it will be before the session's over, I'm not sure. I'm also told that it may not require state money now. There was some state money provided as a match, but this is a project that would be done between now and the year 2014 or something like that, 2015, and so it may not require any state match in this biennium, but it would down the road. And so that really hangs in the balance as to what will happen. Yes?
I take issue with the philosophy that we don't want to subsidize a passenger train, because trains are much more efficient than the automobile. They're
Yep.
much more efficient than airlines. They're much more efficient than helicopters. And if you're going
We're
to
transporting
if
fuel.
you're going to talk about subsidies, we do subsidize the infrastructure for the interstate, for the airports, for the helicopters.
Right.
Why don't we subsidize the form of transportation that is one of the most efficient forms of transportation known to humans?
Well, I think there's not a problem with subsidizing the infrastructure. My problem is an ongoing subsidy because there's not enough ridership to pay for the ongoing costs. Now, that's a little different situation than building the infrastructure, and that's been my concern. The other thing I would say this, I think where you have a very urbanized area and you have a lot of passengers, like in the East Coast of the United States, you can make passenger rail something that can be more feasible than if you're in a rural area. When you're in a rural area and you have to drive a long distance to get there, to get to the train, the chances that people are going to take the train are not nearly as good. So I think, and that's the thing that I think we need to look at and be realistic about. And I do understand what you're saying about the efficiency of transporting things by train as opposed to by truck or some other mechanism. And certainly when it comes to things like coal or ethanol fuel or many other products like that, that makes a lot more sense. But when it comes to passengers, a lot of it comes to the convenience of the people that you're serving. And Americans are pretty spoiled in terms of they like convenience, and if they have to use several different modes of transportation, the chances of getting them to choose to ride the train are not as good.
But if you make it convenient, then people will want to.
Well, if you make it convenient, but here's what I'm saying is, if you're in New York City and you've got a lot of people and you have a rail system that you can, like the subway system there, yes, it's very convenient and it works very well. But if you're in a rural area where it's not going to be convenient because there's just not that many people that live that close to the track.
Is it a populated area?
Well, maybe by Iowa standards it's a populated area, but by, it's not what I would consider a very urban area. And I understand you have students, you might get more ridership from students, but I think that's one of the challenges, and that's certainly one of the issues. And I've said I'm certainly open to considering it, but I just don't want the state to be providing an ongoing subsidy for the losses at the back.
Different topics. Can you tell us a bit about the future of nuclear energy in terms of quantity, monitoring regulation in Iowa?
Well, the question about nuclear energy is, and there are bills in the legislature on this issue. It actually started last year, and now there's another bill this year. And I think what's happened, because the EPA has cracked down so strong on coal, that a lot of people feel that the future generation of electricity, and as I said, Iowa's already a leader in wind energy. And we're number one, in terms of per capita, we're number one. Number two to Texas in overall, but number one in per capita. So I think we've already demonstrated we can do a lot that way. I think we can do even more. But also there's consideration being made now of, and they have through this new use of fracturing, using more natural gas. And then the other alternative, which the Obama administration is also encouraging, and our state is looking at nuclear again. It's my understanding that the newer plants that they're looking at are smaller, more manageable than the ones that were built 30 years or more ago. There hasn't been any built in this country in a long time. But so that's why the Iowa legislature is presently considering that issue. And I think that bill did pass the House. I think it's now in the Senate for consideration. There is considerable interest in it. There is a company, Mid-American Energy, that is interested in this. And the problem is building a nuclear plant is quite expensive, and it is not easy to finance because there hasn't been one built in this country for a long time. And so they have to look at a different way to do that. It would require us to beef up the oversight responsibilities of the Utility Regulation Board to protect the interests of the consumers in this process, because as I understand it, that they would, as opposed to paying for it after the fact, they would ask for it to be paid for as it went by the consumers that would get the benefits of the electricity. Yes.
What's the tax status on ethanol?
Well, that's a good question, because the incentive for ethanol is about to expire, I think, the end of this year. And you may have heard Secretary Vilsack expressing great concerns about if they did what they did with biodiesel last year. We lost a lot of jobs, and a lot of biodiesel plants closed, and then they finally renewed it. But the same is now true with ethanol. And there's a lot of misunderstanding, I think, especially if people live in the East Coast and West Coast, about the benefits of ethanol. And especially with, I think the cost of food has got more to do with the cost of fuel than it has to do with ethanol by a long ways, because of the cost of transporting food. And as you point out, if more of it were done by rail, it would probably be less expensive than having it done by truck. But I think we could phase out the subsidy, but I think it should be done over a period of time, not abruptly. I think if it's done abruptly, if it's just let expire like they did with biodiesel, we'd lose a lot of jobs, and that frankly would be a reversal of our progress in reducing our dependency on foreign oil. So I would hope, and it's not going to be an easy, it's going to be probably one of the hardest battles in the Congress, because you have the oil industry with all of their money and all of their clout lined up against ethanol. You add to that some of the people in the food industry that are lined up against it. So they're up against some pretty powerful, well-financed opposition. But I think it would be a tragic mistake to just eliminate the subsidies or the incentives that have been there for ethanol abruptly. I think if you phase it out over a period of time, that would make more sense. I know that's what, and Secretary Vilsack and I have talked about this, and he was just recently in Iowa with the EPA director, And I think he expressed his feelings about that as well when he